more activated sympathetic system than a parasympathetic system is automatically going to negatively impact executive function. So those are our frontal lobe abilities, like self-soothing, attention, problem solving, self-management, awareness, those things that we need to kind of function complexly as humans in very demanding environments. And the reason I think we see this is there's something going on in the brain, right? That something is driving this autonomic system to not have functioning as it should, regulated wise or balanced. It's not as balanced as it should be. And so there's like this bombardment of sensory stimulus on their brain, and they don't habituate. So their brain is always taking stuff in. It's always responding. It's always kind of releasing excitatory chemicals in the brain. And this leads to this overactivation of the sympathetic system, right? So the sympathetic system is kind of in hyperdrive, like the brain's always pushing on the gas, right? And is just like, let's go. The second part, which is the muscles. And these are how our breathing muscles are impacted. And so what happens, what I have noticed when I have them all hooked up to my equipment, is they have this very choppy style of breathing and chest breathing that is much more noticeable as they age, obviously, but you can capture it even in our younger kiddos. And it's hard to capture until they're like 9 or 10, but you can kind of see it in those younger kids too. And what I think is, as they're kind of building, right, when they start to shut down, because it's not that their body can't shut down, it's that it's for some reason that shutdown is interrupted, it seems. So their body's trying, it's like, oh, we can't do this anymore. We just can't do this anymore. And they start to shut down. And then I think what it looks like happens is they're breathing, because of how their muscles are impacted, how their brain kind of keeps them going, right? They kind of kick themselves back up. So they try to shut down and it just gets interrupted. And so I think that's why we see this kind of increase throughout the day, or even in a short period of time, we can kind of capture a similar problem. And so the effectiveness of that parasympathetic system is interrupted or sort of inhibited. And over time, they kind of develop this very chronic physiological pattern. But really the bigger issue is that window. And so when you're chronically aroused, that window gets smaller, right? And so things that make that window smaller are, chronic arousal, things like trauma, being in unsafe environments, being ill, having other, stressful things happening to you and not getting good sleep, for example. Things that build that are the opposite of those things, right? So we want that window to be big, because then you have more opportunity and time to kind of swing in it. You're going to be able to tolerate distress a lot better, right? So we want big windows. And what happens when we're chronically stressed is those windows just get smaller and smaller. And then over time, when your window gets smaller as it gets smaller, you start to have a lot more threat sensitivity. And then you have a lot more anticipatory anxiety. And what happens is that when you're overly aroused, your brain is kind of in that state, you start to misperceive a neutral stimulus and potentially positive stimulus as potential threats. Right. And so you're kind of overly reactive to things as threats. And where you see this play out often, if any of you have kids that do this, is when they're upset and they're kind of melting down and you're genuinely being very calm. And you're like, hey, buddy, I know you're upset. You just got to calm down. You're using a calm voice. And they're like, why are you yelling at me? And you're like, literally, nobody's yelling at you. We are literally whispering. But when you're here, right, that's how the world sounds to them. So imagine how loud it is if whispering feels like being yelled at, right, in that moment, right? So that's kind of where their brains are at, right? And so they start to eventually develop some super maladaptive but effective coping strategies to keep themselves in that little window they have, right? So they start to do things like, I don't feel okay, so I'm just going to order and align, because anytime we start to do things that are repetitive, like pacing, rocking, ordering and aligning, right? Like you crank your fingers or you like go for a walk, we feel better. Right? Humans cope through these types of things. And so when seeing those things are sometimes coping strategies. So we won't always want to target and get rid of them if they're things that help kids self-soothe. We also don't want to, cultivate maladaptive coping strategies, right? But we don't want to get rid of them too early when they are something that could be potentially helpful. And then we put them on steroids, and that then exacerbates this whole process, right? So this is already there without them on steroids, and then we put them on steroids, which they need, right? So it's just like a really, really less than ideal situation from helping these boys kind of navigate the cross that they're already bearing, which is how dystrophin is affecting their brain,